Welcome to the Deep Dive with Farmtips Diary. Today, we are exploring a question that challenges both tradition and innovation. Can vertical farming, a model so closely tied to urban spaces and high-tech environments, actually thrive in rural areas? Let's break down how vertical systems like hydroponics and aeroponics function outside city walls, the role of energy and renewables in scaling, the cost and profitability factors, how vertical farming might complement traditional agriculture, and the case studies already testing this hybrid future. And as always, stay with us until the end because we will examine whether vertical farming is really the next big step for rural growers or just an urban trend that cannot escape the city's influence. Vertical farming is usually imagined in tall glass buildings in crowded cities, stacked with lush green crops growing under artificial light. But what happens when we take that model into rural areas? Unlike urban centers where land is expensive and space is limited, rural areas offer cheaper land and often more room to expand. Yet vertical farming isn't just about land, it is about technology, control, and resource efficiency. So the question becomes, does vertical farming even make sense in rural settings, where traditional farming already has land in abundance? Let's start with the basics. Hydroponic and aeroponic systems are the backbone of vertical farming. In hydroponics, plants grow in nutrient-rich water rather than soil. In aeroponics, roots are suspended in the air and misted with nutrient solutions. Both methods allow for precise control of water, nutrients, and environment. The major advantage is efficiency. Vertical systems use up to 90% less water than traditional field farming. They eliminate the unpredictability of soil quality and weather, and they can produce crops year-round, independent of season. This is powerful in urban areas where land is scarce. But in rural regions where land is abundant, the selling point must shift. Instead of space, the value becomes about stability, predictability, and potentially higher margins per unit of production. Water scarcity is a growing problem, even in rural areas. Traditional irrigation can be wasteful, especially in drought-prone regions. By using hydroponics and aeroponics, rural farmers can reduce their dependency on increasingly costly water supplies. That efficiency can make sense not only for leafy greens, but also for specialty crops that fetch high market prices. Imagine rural farmers producing herbs, strawberries, or niche vegetables year-round with minimal water and higher reliability. So while the city story is about saving space, the rural story is about saving resources and adding resilience. Now, let's talk about energy. One of the biggest criticisms of vertical farming is the heavy reliance on artificial lighting and climate control systems. In urban settings, this is often justified by land scarcity and high demand. But in rural areas, energy use becomes the make-or-break factor. Electricity costs can eat into profits quickly. If rural vertical farms rely on conventional power grids, they may struggle to compete with open field or greenhouse production. This is where renewable energy enters the conversation. Solar panels, wind turbines, and even biomass can offset electricity needs. Rural areas often have more space and opportunity to integrate renewable power than urban environments. In fact, coupling vertical systems with local renewable energy might be the key to making rural vertical farming scalable and financially viable. Cost and profitability remain the central questions. Can rural vertical farms actually lower costs or boost profit margins compared to traditional farming? The answer depends on the crop, the market, and the technology investment. For staple crops like wheat, rice, or corn, vertical farming cannot compete. The scale and low margins of commodity crops simply do not fit into high-tech growing towers. But for high-value crops such as microgreens, herbs, strawberries, or even seedling production for transplanting, vertical systems may shine. Rural farmers could use vertical systems as a supplement rather than a replacement. For example, growing high-margin crops vertically while continuing field cultivation for staples. This diversification could stabilize income in times of market volatility. Another overlooked advantage is risk management. Climate change has made farming less predictable. Floods, droughts, pests, and extreme heat events can destroy traditional harvests. Vertical systems provide a controlled environment, shielding part of a farmer's income from these risks. Think of it as not putting all your eggs in one basket. By integrating a vertical component, rural farmers reduce their exposure to external shocks. Let's also consider community and economic impact. Rural regions often face declining populations, aging farmers, and fewer young people entering agriculture. Vertical farming introduces a modern tech-driven angle to farming that might attract younger generations back into rural life. Imagine a farm where alongside traditional tractors and fields, there are AI-controlled vertical racks producing herbs or berries with high efficiency. This fusion could make agriculture more appealing to tech-savvy youth who might otherwise leave rural areas. Now let's look at practical ways vertical farming can add value to traditional farms rather than trying to replace them. First, seedling production. Farmers often struggle with inconsistent seedling quality. Vertical systems can create uniform, healthy seedlings in controlled environments, ready for transplanting into fields. Second, off-season production. When the field is dormant, vertical systems can continue producing crops for market, ensuring year-round income. Third, niche markets. Restaurants, supermarkets, and local co-ops increasingly demand specialty greens and herbs. Rural farmers can meet that demand directly with vertical systems while using their fields for bulk crops. This is a hybrid model that works with traditional farming instead of against it. So are rural areas already experimenting with vertical farming? Yes. Take the case of certain berry farms in Europe that have added vertical hydroponic stacks to increase yield without expanding land use. Or farms in North America producing microgreens for urban markets while still maintaining traditional crops. In Asia, some rural farms are building greenhouse vertical hybrids powered by solar energy to reduce costs. These operations show that while vertical farming alone may not replace traditional methods, it can create synergy and resilience. The long-term question is whether vertical farming can scale in rural areas to the point of transforming agriculture. The answer is complex. It will not replace staple crop farming. Fields will always be necessary for grains, pulses, and large-scale food supply. But vertical systems can carve out a growing role in high-value crop niches, off-season markets, and risk diversification strategies. For rural farmers facing increasing uncertainty, vertical farming may serve as a tool, not a replacement. Of course, challenges remain. The upfront costs of building a vertical system are high. Many rural farmers already face financial pressure from inflation, debt, and fluctuating crop prices. Without support from governments, cooperatives, or private investors, adoption will be limited. Policy could play a role here. Subsidies for renewable integration, grants for technology adoption, and training programs could help rural farmers at vertical farming without overwhelming debt. Community-owned vertical systems may also emerge, where multiple farmers share resources and market access. As we look ahead, one thing becomes clear. Vertical farming in rural areas is not a replacement for traditional agriculture. It is an additional layer of resilience, a tool that farmers can adopt strategically to manage water use, reduce risks, and capture new markets. The narrative must shift away from city towers to rural innovation hubs, because in the long run, the most impactful use of vertical farming might not be in urban skyscrapers, but in rural landscapes where food systems are rooted. So, can vertical farming work outside the city? Yes, but with caveats. It will not take over traditional agriculture, and it must be adapted to rural realities. Energy costs, crop selection, and integration with existing systems are critical. But with renewable power, smart market strategies, and hybrid models, vertical farming could add a valuable new dimension to rural agriculture. The future of farming may not be a battle between tradition and innovation. It may be a collaboration where rural fields and vertical towers coexist, each playing to their strengths. We hope this exploration has been valuable. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you again on our next deep dive.